Alright, I think it's time for another potentially spicy take, and it has to do with Benchmade again. We're gonna... get out of here. My sloob. Why do I always do this? Every single time. I know it's dangerous, I know it's a mess, and I still do it. And I don't know why I keep doing it. Why do I keep doing it? That was a very dangerous sequence of events. Well, anyways, hey there, my benevolent ballistic barnacles. Alright, so last time I talked about Benchmade, I made an interesting take about how I think that the 51s, the Morphos, are a little bit underrated because I think that they do more love than what they actually got because people did not like them when they first came out, at least stock. People sometimes like the modded ones, but the stock ones I think deserve a little bit more love than what they actually got. They were very hated. Well, I'm gonna talk about this one today. This guy, however, gets so much clout. This is a 42. This is the Benchmade 42 balisong. It came out in 2000. As of 2024, which is this year, it is 24 years old. And this dude gets so much clout for some reason. I mean, I can see kind of why, based off of some certain types of events and times when it came out, but it gets so much more clout than I think it actually deserves. Yes, it is legendary and well known, but that doesn't mean that it's deserving of all the clout that people still give it today, at least in the way that I see people giving it. People seem to like to give this the clout of being an amazing flipper for today's standards. A lot of people say that it holds up to today's standards. Well, I will give you one thing. It's not a terrible flipper, however, it is not up to today's standards, and that is my take. That is what we're going to talk about today, that this is not up to today's standards. It could be better, but it's not, and it has all the jank of a CCC as we know it, because this is the basis for all the things that people clone out in the cloning companies. This is the base of it all. Anyways, all that aside, today we're going to talk about how this doesn't quite hold up to today's standards. Yes, people like them. Yes, there are people who just genuinely flip them and do really well with it. But does that mean that it holds up to today? No. No, it doesn't. It's a subjective hobby. And objectively, this just doesn't fit to today's standards. That's not a bad thing. But people need to stop giving it undue clout and making this thing almost $1,000 if it's in the box, and it's so expensive to get one of these, and there's so many of them. They're not rare. People don't realize how common these are. They're not rare. Stop charging so much for it. Even this one with its edge. Look at my 42. It's a sad boy. It's got a reground edge, and it's so ugly. Oh, look at that. That's bad. And I still paid $300 for it. $300! It's not worth that. They were $200 when they were discontinued. Anyways, that's enough ranting about its financial side, and everybody knows that these are overpriced. Everybody agrees that they're generally overpriced. Most people, at least. The people who are owning these and trying to sell them often say that they're worth it because they're trying to get that money out of people. But my point today is about how it doesn't hold up to today's flipping standards, not about its financial everything. And I think a good way to discuss that is to compare it to a modern golden standard of flipping. So, introducing a Kraken. Two balisong titans from two different eras, from the old original era and the current modern day era. This is the founder of flipping. That's why it's legendary, or at least flipping as we know it. This is what we all use today as the general gauge of what's considered a good flipping balisong, the base golden standard. This used to be it, this is it now. Do people still call the 42 a golden standard? No, they don't. And there's a good reason for why. Not just because they're expensive, because they're quote-unquote rare. They're not rare, there's so many of them, there's thousands of them out there. Alright, sorry, we're not going on that rant again. Anyways, this is older. This is 24 years old now. Specifically this one because it's a first production, it is that old. But the style is just outdated. It has been 24 years since this was first released. And 24 years? That's a long time. things change over the course of years. A quarter of a century? That's a long time from the perspective of a human. So, of course, things are going to move past this. Things will improve, things will get better. People will learn how to do better things, both in terms of machining and what feels good for flipping. And in that time, we came with this. We came out with this, I mean. Words are hard for people to say, like me, because I am dumb. The Kraken has released in that 24-year period since this was initially released. This was released initially in 2019, the first iteration. They're now on version 3, but it has gone through several versions since, going from 1 to 1.5 to 2.5, now we're on 3, and it's just been improving ever since. This has been considered the golden standard since then. This thing has been superseded, not once, but potentially twice, because at some point when the replicant from BRS was released, people considered that to be the new golden standard of good flipping. Or at least a lot of people. It's hard to say who all because I wasn't technically in the community at that time. But I do see people still talking about it, and I have seen some old things from people, and generally people consider that better than this. Now we're at this. And in general, this is just better, both in terms of balance and flipping and also just materials, well, to a degree. Machining processes and production have changed since this was created. This has cast titanium handles. Yes, titanium is technically stronger, but casting can bring a lot of issues potentially. There are real cases of 4X series handles shattering or cracking on people. That's a thing that happens with cast things sometimes. Just because the process can potentially introduce things that cause stress and weak points on it that will break upon impact to the ground. This is milled aluminum. Aluminum is, yes, technically softer than titanium is, so it's going to pick up scratches and dents easier. However, it's still 7075, which is a very durable alloy of aluminum. It's actually the aluminum you can find on aircrafts. But also, this is milled. It's not cast. Milling with the proper mill and coolant, or at least if you're doing proper milling by hand, going at a slow pace that you're not going to overheat it, does not introduce the same stress that casting does. The process of casting can introduce stress within the handles. It's kind of like tempered glass. If it hits something in the right way, it's going to shatter, or it could have small fractures in it that will lead to it just completely shattering and leads to integrity issues. This does not have that. If it's done proper, like these usually are, then it's not going to shatter like this will. The blades, I'm pretty sure both are still milled, because milling steel has been cheaper than milling titanium, at least back then. Now it's different, but when this was made, yes, milling titanium was very expensive. So we've gone over why this is not the golden standard anymore while comparing it to the current golden standard, but it might also help to compare it to something that is made with similar materials as well. So let me bring out something else that's more akin to this in material. Channel titanium and steel, and also it's got tang pins. This is an Invictus, made by Adam Heibel. It's mostly the same construction and similar materials, so I think that it's a good way to compare the two things from old to new. It's got similar stuff, but it's got modern techniques used on it. So let's go over those, shall we? So we already went over how this one's handles are cast titanium. Well, this one, they're titanium, but it's milled. It uses our modern technique of milling the titanium. It's also a different grade of titanium. This would be grade 5 titanium. This is more like a grade 2 because it's cast. This is an alloy that is very durable, and also you can anodize it in pretty colors. This is called an anodization, the color on it. This is called a toxic ano. I kind of hate it, but you can get it done in almost any color of the rainbow, except for red, which is unfortunate because red is my favorite. So being a milled billet of titanium, it doesn't have those same potential durability issues that a cast titanium would have. And in addition to that, more modern features on it would include the controlled weight distribution. Casting can potentially lead to some impurities in it that change the entire balance of it, but this is just a consistent grade 5 alloy. And on the inside of it, when you look into the channels, it has something in the channel called a relief. The relief means that it's wider than the blade plus its washers. If you look at this older one, the channel is just as wide as the washers plus the blade. So when you have it closed, you can't really easily tune out that. That's called tap, when you wiggle it and the blade hits the inside of the channel. It's also only on washers, so that doesn't help, but most modern balisongs, there are some still being made on washers-only systems, but a lot of the higher-end ones, nicer ones at least, have bushings in them. Even aluminum ones have it. And part of what bushings do is it makes it so that when you clamp down on the screw, the two parts of the... It doesn't always have to be channel, sometimes it's sandwich, but the pieces of handle that surround the blade and the washers clamp down on the bushing instead of the blade, so you can tighten the screws as hard as you want. As long as the bushings are tuned right, it's not going to bind. So you get free swing, however you do it, and also the relief does that. No tap. A well-tuned bushing system prevents things like play or tap, or if you really have a bad balisong, blade rub, which can damage the knife. Modern balisongs don't have that issue as much because precision machining has taken out a lot of the issues of casting. Now, unlike titanium versus aluminum, the type of steel used in the blade doesn't really matter that much for balance and flipping necessarily, but we'll still talk about it since we're here. This blade on the first production is 440C stainless steel. It's not the best steel for a live blade. In the modern day, some people use 440C as a trainer blade for balisongs because it's hardenable, relatively durable, and you don't have to worry about an edge on it. So the fact that this is a live blade on 440C steel is, well, not the best for edge retention. It's not the best steel for a blade. Now, they did move on to something called Sandvik for a bit, and then I believe they moved on to still using 440C sometimes, but I think some of them used 154 CPM, which is better, but it's still rust. A lot of modern balisongs will use 154 for lower types of balisongs in terms of quality, sometimes AEBL, which is a decent steel for balisongs. Higher end ones will typically use S30V or S35VN. Now, they're not the hardest steels, they don't keep the best edge, but they keep a relatively good edge, and they're easy to sharpen. On a type of thing that we drop all the time while flipping, being able to resharpen it if you want a sharp knife is very important. It's also good that it's not the hardest, because if it's too hard, it can shatter, it can snap relatively easily. Looking at you, MagnaCut. Now, if you look here on the Invictus, it says that the steel type is RWL34. Now, I'm not sure how good it is for balisongs necessarily, but it's used here. It's just not a very common steel. So this is not the best example of every live blade. It's just that. Oh, and before I forget, I mentioned tune earlier. I can't just mention tune and not show this. Watch this. Look at how much play and wiggle that these handles have. That's normal for a 42. Play and wiggle is not necessarily bad, but when you're flipping it, you don't necessarily want to just constantly hear. That's what a good tune does. It also keeps your blade in good condition because, as you can see on this one, it's got a little bit of blade rub. Right there. You can see the rubbing. Otherwise, it's in okay-ish condition. Probably wasn't flipped very much. But on the modern balisongs with bushings, look at that. The Invictus is a little bit bad. It's fine, but it doesn't tap as you heard earlier. And the Kraken, you can see that there's very little wiggle. There's a little bit of wiggle, that's normal. Everything's going to wiggle to some degree, but it's not tapping or playing like that thing does. Silent. It's a good tune. That's what good bushings do. That's what good surface grinds and good machining do. Precision machining is cool. So all in all, is the 42 a bad flipper? No, that's too subjective, and there are some people who just genuinely love these things, and I've seen some people do some incredible things on these things, flipping-wise, but does it hold up to today's standards in terms of objectively best or golden standard? No, not at all. I think we can all agree, after bringing up those points, that this, it just doesn't, and that's okay. It doesn't have to, but people need to stop pretending that just because it's a legendary balisong for the flipping community means that they're going to have some life-changing flipping experience, because you're not. It's just a balisong, ultimately. A very expensive balisong in today's market. Now, in all fairness, there are people who just genuinely love this thing. I'm sure that in such a subjective hobby, of course there's going to be people who just have this thing completely aligned to their tastes. And of course there's the people who've been in this hobby for a long, long time. People probably have fond, nostalgic memories of this thing because it came out during a time when handles on balisongs were typically bronze, brass, steel, heavy materials that made them absurdly handle biased. So when they made the switch to titanium for the 42, it probably felt fantastic because instead of just being able to do things like standard open and close, maybe a rollover if you really wanted to, you could do other more modern flipping things like fanning, things that you could not do with that kind of absurd handle bias. And it must have been really cool to discover that you could do these kinds of things with a balisong when everything else was just bad. So, of course it has its merits, and it has its place in our memories and our history as flippers and balisong people just in general. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily up to today's standards. You do have your merits. You're just a little bit behind the times, and that's okay. So I'm sure somebody's going to be watching this and probably be wondering, how does it flip? Well, mine does have a weird regrind on the edge, but it's so little material taken off that it doesn't really change too much. And I did have one of these 10 years ago, and it really doesn't feel that different. And everybody just generally agrees that 42s are handle biased. They are strongly handle biased, and that's probably why people who've been in this hobby for a long time prefer that kind of handle bias. I mean, it can still do a lot of the things that we do today, like fanning and stuff. So, it can technically do modern flipping. It's just handle biased. So you're gonna have to enjoy handle bias to really like this thing. If you like neutral, you're probably not gonna like it as much just because that's how it is. I can't Z-choker apparently, at least in this space, but it's not terrible. You're on thin ice, mister. Anyways, it's not terrible, it's just a little bit weird. I don't want to record that. I don't even remember what all I said. We're just gonna go with it then. So TLDR, no, it's not a bad flipper, but it really doesn't hold up to today's standards, does it? No, I think we can all agree. It doesn't hold up to today's standards. It's legendary, but it's not going to change your whole flipping just by touching it. And people need to stop charging so many hundreds of dollars. They're not worth that. But it does have its place in our community as something legendary for starting what is our modern flipping. Like a grandfather. It's not up to today's standards, but it's respectable. So I hope you enjoyed this opinion piece, my take on the 42. Leave a like or something if you want. I put this at the end because clearly if you've been here long enough, you must have enjoyed it to some degree, and I don't want to clog up the beginning with whatever the shill that is, and I'm gonna take this back with me to the fiery depths of hell where it belongs.